The rain hammered against the stained glass windows of Sinclair Manor, inside one of the most luxurious estates in New York. Silence felt heavier than money. Richard Sinclair stood beside his granddaughter's bed, at 80 years old. He had built an empire worth billions. Hotels, private hospitals, construction companies, investment firms. People feared his name, board members obeyed him. Politicians respected him, competitors avoided him. Yet none of that power could give back one thing, his granddaughter's sight. Victoria Sinclair sat quietly near the window, her beautiful blue eyes, once full of confidence, now stared into darkness. She had been blind for 18 months. The accident had taken more than her vision. It had stolen her trust, her laughter, her future. Every specialist in America had failed. Experimental surgeries, private clinics, doctors from Switzerland, nothing worked. Richard slowly knelt beside her. "Victoria." She smiled gently. "You don't have to pretend you're not crying, Grandpa." He quickly wiped his eyes. "I'm getting old." "No, you only cry when you're scared." He couldn't answer, because she was right for the first time in his life. Richard Sinclair felt helpless just then. The family physician entered the room. His face carried bad news again. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sinclair. The latest scans show no improvement. The damage is permanent. We've exhausted every treatment currently available." The room became silent. Victoria lowered her head. "It's okay. I'm tired of everyone apologizing." Richard looked toward the fireplace. For weeks, one thought had refused to leave his mind. Years ago, his late wife had made him promise something strange. She had believed in people more than medicine before she died. She handed him an old handwritten letter. He had laughed back then. Today, it was the only thing left. He opened the drawer. The faded paper still smelled of old ink. It read, "When darkness surrounds our granddaughter, the man who restores her heart will arrive with empty pockets. Do not judge him by what he owns. Judge him by how he treats those who cannot repay him." Richard had ignored those words for years, until today. He looked toward his chief of security, Marcus. "Yes, sir. I want every shelter, every charity, every mechanic shop, every community center checked." Marcus frowned. "For what exactly?" Richard folded the letter. "I'm looking for a man who still chooses kindness when life has given him nothing." Across the city, inside a tiny neighborhood garage, Ethan Carter tightened the final bolt beneath an old pickup truck. Oil covered his hands. His shirt was faded. His boots were worn. His paycheck barely covered food. When the customer tried paying extra, Ethan pushed 2 bills back. "You gave me too much." The old man blinked. "I know. You need it more than I do." Ethan smiled. "So do you." The customer stared. "Young man, there aren't many people like you anymore." Ethan laughed. "My mom says being honest is cheaper than lying." The old man drove away, across the street. Marcus had watched everything, without saying a word. That evening, Ethan returned to the homeless shelter where his mother volunteered, not because they were homeless anymore, but because they remembered what hunger felt like. Mrs. Rosa Carter served soup with tired hands. "You worked late again." "We had 3 broken engines." She smiled. "You skipped lunch again." He shrugged. "You always know. A mother always knows." She handed him a bowl. Before he could take the first bite, a little girl dropped her tray. Soup spilled everywhere. She burst into tears. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean." Without hesitation, Ethan handed her his own dinner. "You can have mine. But then you won't eat." "I'll survive. You need it more." Marcus watched from outside. Again. He quietly made a phone call. "Chief, I think I've found him." The following morning, 2 black Rolls-Royces stopped outside the garage. Every mechanic froze. Men in expensive suits stepped out. The foreman whispered, "Ethan, what did you do?" "I honestly don't know." Marcus approached. "Mr. Ethan Carter." "Yes, Mr. Richard Sinclair would like to meet you." Ethan laughed. "I think you've got the wrong person." Marcus didn't smile. "I never do." 20 minutes later, Ethan walked into the largest mansion he had ever seen. Crystal chandeliers, Italian marble floors, paintings worth millions, everything felt unreal. Richard Sinclair stood waiting. "You must be Ethan." "Yes, sir." "I have a proposal." Ethan nodded politely. "What kind of proposal?" Richard looked directly into his eyes. "I want you to marry my granddaughter." Ethan blinked. "I'm sorry." What? Ethan stared at Richard Sinclair as though he'd misheard him. I'm sorry, sir. I think you have the wrong person. Richard remained calm. I don't. You said, to marry your granddaughter. Yes, the Victoria Sinclair. The billionaire. Richard nodded once. The same Victoria. Ethan gave an awkward laugh. There are probably a million reasons why that's impossible. Richard folded his hands. Tell me one. Ethan looked around the luxurious office. I'm broke. I fix engines. I rent a tiny room. I've never worn a tuxedo. I've never even been inside a mansion until today. I'm nobody. Richard answered quietly. My granddaughter doesn't need another billionaire. She needs someone with a heart. Ethan frowned. I don't understand. Richard slowly walked toward the fireplace. For the past 18 months, everyone around Victoria has wanted something. Our money, our company, our name. No one has truly cared about her. They only cared about what marrying her would give them. He paused. You are different. Ethan shook his head. You don't even know me. Richard smiled faintly. I know enough. He pressed a remote. A large television lit up. Security footage appeared. The first clip showed Ethan returning extra money to an elderly customer. The second, giving away his lunch to a hungry child. The third, repairing an ambulance free of charge because the local clinic couldn't afford the bill. Ethan looked embarrassed. You watched me. I observed your character. Richard corrected him. There is a difference. For several seconds, the room stayed silent. Finally, Ethan spoke. Even if I agreed, why would your granddaughter marry a stranger? Richard's expression darkened. She won't have much choice. Ethan immediately stood. No, I won't force anyone into marriage. Richard looked directly at him. You misunderstand. She already agreed. Ethan froze. What? At that same moment, Victoria sat quietly in the mansion's private garden. She couldn't see the roses anymore, but she could still smell them. Her personal assistant, Lily, gently placed a cup of tea into her hands. Your grandfather met someone today. Victoria smiled weakly. Another doctor. Lily hesitated. No. A man. Victoria sighed. So another businessman wants to marry the blind billionaire. Lily stayed silent. Victoria laughed bitterly. They always think I'm too blind to notice. They speak kindly to my face, then ask about my inheritance behind my back. I've heard enough. Lily quietly reached for her hand. This one may be different. Victoria lowered her head. They're always different. Until money enters the conversation. Back inside the study, Richard opened another folder. Inside were newspaper headlines. SINCLAIR heiress engagement collapses. CEO's son calls off wedding. Insiders question billion-dollar succession. Ethan looked confused. What happened? Richard answered coldly. Damien Holt. He was Victoria's fiancé. When she lost her eyesight, he disappeared. He claimed he wasn't ready for marriage. 3 days later, Damien was photographed on a luxury yacht with another billionaire's daughter. Ethan clenched his jaw. He left because she became blind. Richard nodded. My granddaughter never cried in front of anyone, but I heard her crying every night. Ethan looked toward the floor. No one deserved that, especially not someone already living in darkness. Richard slid another document across the desk. This isn't a business contract. It's a promise. Ethan slowly opened it. There was no payment, no fortune, no inheritance. Only one sentence. You are free to leave this marriage whenever Victoria chooses. Ethan looked surprised. I don't get anything. Richard smiled. If money is what you're looking for, you're sitting in the wrong room. Ethan looked back at the contract. So why me? Richard's answer came without hesitation. Because you were the only man my investigators found, who helped people when nobody was watching. Hours later, Ethan walked through the mansion alone. Everything felt unreal. A maid led him toward the east wing. Miss Sinclair is waiting. His heart pounded. He had repaired engines, changed tires, worked 12-hour shifts. None of that prepared him for meeting the woman whose face had appeared on magazine covers for years. The door slowly opened. Victoria stood beside the window. Sunlight poured across her dark crimson silk dress. Her eyes remained fixed on the world she could no longer see. Without turning around, she spoke softly. So, you're the man my grandfather believes can save me. Ethan swallowed. I don't think anyone can save another person. Victoria smiled sadly. That's the first honest thing anyone has said to me in months. She slowly turned toward the sound of his voice, even without her sight. Her presence filled the room. Ethan couldn't stop looking at her. Not because she was beautiful, though she undeniably was, but because, behind her calm smile, he could see someone carrying unbearable loneliness. Victoria broke the silence. Tell me something. What do you want from this marriage? Ethan answered immediately, nothing. For the first time, the faint smile on her face disappeared, because every man before him had answered with money, power, shares, luck. Ethan smiled nervously. I'm nobody special. I grew up in a trailer outside Albany. My father passed away when I was 12. My mom worked 2 jobs. I started fixing bicycles before I learned how to drive. Victoria listened without interrupting. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't listing achievements. He wasn't talking about money. He was simply telling the truth after a long silence. She asked quietly, "Are you afraid of marrying a blind woman?" Ethan answered without hesitation, "I'm afraid of hurting someone who's already been hurt enough." Victoria's fingers tightened around her cane. No one, not once, had ever answered her like that. A soft knock interrupted them. Richard entered the room. He looked from Victoria to Ethan. "I'll give you two a few more minutes." Victoria nodded. "Grandpa, did you choose him because of me? Or because of Grandma's letter?" Richard stopped walking. For several seconds, he said nothing. Finally, he smiled. "Both." He quietly left the room. Victoria turned toward Ethan again. "My grandmother believed strange things. So did my mother. They always said, kind people arrive when life feels hopeless." She laughed softly. "I stopped believing that after the accident." Ethan looked at her. Maybe hope didn't disappear. Maybe it just got delayed. For the first time in nearly 2 years, Victoria laughed. A real laugh, not a polite one, not one she forced for visitors. Outside the room, Richard heard it. His eyes slowly filled with tears. He hadn't heard that sound since before the accident. 3 days later, the wedding took place. There were no television cameras, no celebrity guests, no magazine photographers. Richard had canceled every media invitation. "This marriage belongs to my granddaughter." Not the newspapers. Only close staff, family lawyers, and a few trusted friends attended. Victoria wore a breathtaking dark red designer gown, simple, elegant, timeless. Ethan stood at the altar in a classic black tuxedo. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. Marcus leaned closer, nervous. "I've rebuilt engines with fewer moving parts than my heart right now." Marcus smiled for the first time. "You'll be fine." As Victoria walked slowly toward the altar, holding Richard's arm, the room became completely silent. She couldn't see Ethan, but she could hear him breathing. When she reached him, the officiant smiled warmly. "Do you, Ethan Carter, promise to honor, protect, and cherish Victoria Sinclair through every season of life?" Without looking away from her, Ethan answered, "I do." The officiant turned. "Victoria Sinclair, do you accept Ethan Carter as your husband?" Victoria took a slow breath. Then, instead of answering immediately, she asked one question. "Ethan, if one day my eyesight never returns, will you regret this?" The room froze. Every guest waited. Ethan gently reached for her hand. "I didn't come here hoping you'd see me. I came here hoping you'd never feel alone again." Victoria's lips trembled. A single tear slipped down her cheek. "I do." The vows were complete. Across the city, someone watched the ceremony on a private tablet. Damien Holt, Victoria's former fiancé. He burst into laughter. She married a mechanic. His mother, Claire Holt, wasn't laughing. She stared at Ethan's face. Something about him bothered her. "Find out everything about him." Damien smirked. "Why?" "He's nobody." Claire slowly shook her head. "People with nothing sometimes become the biggest threat." Damien rolled his eyes. "He's just another poor man who got lucky." Claire looked out the window. "I hope you're right." Because deep inside, she had a feeling the mechanic had just stepped into a world where billions of dollars and dangerous secrets were waiting, and someone powerful was already planning to make sure his marriage didn't survive. The honeymoon lasted exactly 48 hours, not because Ethan and Victoria argued, not because they regretted the marriage, but because someone inside Sinclair Global wanted Ethan gone. On Monday morning, Richard invited Ethan to the company's headquarters. The 80-story glass tower overlooked Manhattan like a monument to power. Employees stopped walking as Ethan entered the lobby. He wasn't wearing an expensive Italian suit, just a clean navy blazer Richard had insisted he borrow. Even then, he still looked nothing like the executives around him. Whispers followed him everywhere. That's him. The mechanic, the new husband, the billionaire's grandson-in-law. He doesn't belong here. Ethan heard every word. But he kept walking. Inside the executive boardroom, 12 directors sat around a massive walnut table. Some had worked with Richard for 30 years. Others only cared about the company's stock price. Richard entered first. Then Victoria, then Ethan. The room instantly became silent. One executive finally spoke. Mr. Sinclair. Surely this young man won't be attending board meetings. Richard answered calmly. He'll attend whenever I invite him. Another director scoffed, with respect. He's a mechanic. What could he possibly contribute to a billion-dollar corporation? Before Richard could answer, Ethan quietly stood. Nothing. Everyone looked confused. I didn't come here to run your company. I came because Mr. Sinclair asked me to support my wife. If my presence makes anyone uncomfortable, I'll wait outside. The room fell silent again. Richard smiled to himself. Most people in that room would have fought for power. Ethan had just walked away from it, across the table. Victoria couldn't see the expressions, but she could hear them. The silence, the shifting chairs, the uneasy breathing. She knew exactly what had happened. Someone had tried to humiliate Ethan, and Ethan had refused to play their game for the first time. She felt proud of the decision she'd made. The meeting ended an hour later. As Ethan waited near the elevators, an elderly janitor struggled with a heavy cleaning cart. Several executives walked past without noticing. Ethan immediately stepped forward. Here. I've got it. The janitor smiled. You don't have to. I know, but I want to. Marcus happened to witness the moment. Again, another act of kindness, another reminder. Richard had chosen the right man. Meanwhile, 3 floors below, Claire Holt sat inside a private conference room. She wasn't supposed to be there. Officially, her family's company had no authority inside Sinclair Global anymore. Unofficially, she still had allies. Damien slammed a folder onto the table. Our investigators finished. Claire opened it. No criminal record. No debt collectors. No gambling. No lawsuits. No secret children. No fraud. Damien frowned. So. Claire slowly closed the folder. That's the problem. I was hoping we'd find something. She leaned forward. If we can't destroy his past, we'll have to destroy his future. That evening, Victoria asked Ethan to take a walk through the mansion's garden. The sun was beginning to set. Birds filled the air with soft songs. Victoria held Ethan's arm, not because she had to, because she wanted to. You've been quiet today. Ethan smiled. I'm still trying to understand how people can own buildings taller than mountains. Victoria laughed. They can't. They just think they do. For a while, they simply walked together. Then Victoria suddenly asked, Can I ask you something honest? Always. Do you ever wish this marriage hadn't happened? Ethan thought carefully. A week ago. I believed my future would be repairing engines forever. Now, I'm married to someone who trusts me. I don't regret that. Victoria stopped walking. So you don't pity me? Ethan gently shook his head. No. I admire you. She looked surprised. I'm blind. You wake up every morning, knowing the world is dark, and you still choose kindness. That's courage. Victoria felt tears gathering again. For months, everyone had focused on what she had lost. Ethan was the first person to remind her of what she still had. High above the garden, someone watched from a balcony. Claire Holt lowered a pair of binoculars. They're getting close. Damien folded his arms. They've only been married a few days. Claire smiled coldly. Exactly. If they fall in love, everything becomes much harder. She looked toward one of her trusted associates. I want Ethan Carter investigated again. Dig deeper. I don't care how clean he looks. Everyone has a weakness. And if he doesn't, we'll create one. Far below, Ethan and Victoria continued walking. A week passed. For the first time since the accident, Sinclair Manor didn't feel empty. The staff noticed it first. Victoria smiled more often. She ate full meals again. She even started playing the grand piano. something she hadn't touched in almost 2 years. Richard watched quietly from the hallway. His granddaughter wasn't healed. She was coming back to life, and he knew exactly why. One rainy afternoon, Victoria sat in the music room, gently running her fingers across the piano keys. She stopped. "Ethan, I'm here. I can always tell." He smiled. "How? You breathe differently than everyone else." He laughed. "I've never been complimented for breathing." She smiled. "You don't make people nervous. They relax when you're nearby." After a pause, she quietly asked, "Will you tell me about your childhood?" Ethan pulled up a chair. "There isn't much to tell. My dad fixed trucks. My mom cleaned hotel rooms. We never had much, but every Sunday, my dad would drive around helping strangers whose cars had broken down." Victoria tilted her head. "For free, most of the time. Why, he used to say, 'Money fixes cars, kindness fixes people.'" Victoria repeated the sentence softly. "Kindness fixes people." She smiled. "I think your father was right." That evening, Richard invited Ethan into his private study without saying a word. He handed him a thick envelope. Inside were old newspaper articles, medical reports, police files, photographs. Ethan looked confused. "What is all this?" Richard took a slow breath. "It's everything we know." About the accident, 18 months earlier. Victoria had been driving home from a charity gala. She wasn't speeding. She wasn't drinking. She wasn't using her phone. Security cameras showed a black SUV following her for nearly 12 miles. Then, on an isolated bridge, a truck suddenly crossed the center line. Victoria swerved. Her car slammed through the guardrail. It plunged nearly 30 feet into a river below. She survived, barely. The driver of the truck disappeared. The SUV was never identified, and the police called it an accident. Richard looked Ethan in the eyes. "I never believed them." "You think someone tried to kill her?" "I know someone did." Ethan slowly turned another page. There were photographs of the wreckage. The front brake line had been cut, not damaged, cut. He looked up. "The investigators missed this." Richard shook his head. "They didn't. They ignored it. Someone paid them." The realization sent a chill through Ethan. This wasn't an accident. It was attempted murder. Richard nodded, "And whoever planned it never expected Victoria to survive." Across town, inside a luxury penthouse, Claire Holt poured herself a glass of wine. Damien sat across from her. "I heard Richard reopened the accident file." Claire didn't even look surprised. "He was always going to." Damien frowned. "Should we be worried?" Claire finally looked at him. "Only if people start asking the right questions." She walked to the window. The truck driver disappeared. The mechanic who serviced Victoria's car disappeared. The detective retired 2 weeks later. Damien slowly stood. "You planned all that?" Claire's expression remained unreadable. "I planned for everything." For the first time, Damien looked afraid of his own mother. The next morning, Victoria asked Ethan to accompany her to a rehabilitation center. It was the first time she'd agreed to continue therapy in months. Inside, a young physical therapist greeted her warmly. "It's good to see you smiling again." Victoria laughed. "I've had a good reason." The therapist glanced toward Ethan. "Your husband." Victoria nodded proudly. "He's the best thing that's happened to me since before the accident." Ethan looked away, embarrassed, but hearing those words changed something inside him. This marriage had started as an obligation. Somewhere along the way, it had become real. After therapy, they walked slowly toward the parking area. Suddenly, Victoria stopped. "Ethan." "What is it?" "I smell gasoline." He frowned. "So do I." Before he could react, a loud explosion echoed behind them. Boom. Flames burst from the black SUV that had been assigned to drive them home. Glass exploded across the parking lot. People screamed. Security guards rushed toward the fire. Ethan instinctively wrapped his arms around Victoria and pulled her behind a concrete pillar. She trembled. "What happened?" Ethan stared at the burning vehicle. His heart pounded. "If we'd left therapy 2 minutes earlier, we would have been inside that SUV." Firefighters arrived within minutes. Police quickly sealed off the area. An officer approached Richard, who had rushed to the scene. "Mr. Sinclair, our preliminary investigation suggests an engine failure." Ethan immediately interrupted. "No." He pointed toward the underside of the destroyed vehicle. I've been a mechanic for 10 years. Engines don't explode like that. He looked directly at the officer. Someone planted a bomb. The officer's expression changed, and standing across the street, hidden inside a black sedan. Claire Holt watched the flames with cold, emotionless eyes. She whispered just 4 words. "Next time, don't miss." The flames climbed higher. Black smoke swallowed the parking lot. Victoria instinctively reached for Ethan's hand. She couldn't see the fire, but she could hear the panic. Sirens, people shouting, glass cracking. She tightened her grip. "Ethan, are we safe?" He gently squeezed her hand. "Yes. I'm right here." She nodded. Those 4 words were enough. Richard Sinclair arrived moments later, the moment he saw the burning SUV. His face turned pale. He rushed toward Victoria. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "No." Ethan pulled me away. Richard slowly looked at Ethan. For the second time, the young mechanic had saved his granddaughter, only this time. It wasn't from loneliness, it was from death. Police officers surrounded the wreckage. One detective carefully examined the twisted metal. "This area is restricted." Ethan stepped forward. "I need 30 seconds. The detective frowned. "And why would I allow that?" Richard answered for him. "Because if Ethan says something's wrong." "I believe him." The detective reluctantly nodded. Ethan crouched beside what remained of the engine. Years of repairing vehicles had trained his eyes to notice details others ignored. Within seconds, he spotted something. A small section of melted copper wire. It didn't belong there. Neither did the remains of a digital timing device. He stood up slowly. This wasn't an accident. It was professionally planned. The detective stared at him. "How can you be sure?" Ethan pointed toward the frame. The explosive wasn't attached to the fuel tank. It was placed beside the brake assembly. The goal wasn't just to destroy the vehicle. It was to make it impossible to stop. Even the bomb squad technician paused. After examining the area himself, he quietly nodded. "He's right. Someone had built the bomb to guarantee there would be no survivors." News of the attack spread across New York within hours. Every television network carried the same headline: "Billionaire Heiress survives second mysterious incident." Outside Sinclair Global, reporters crowded the entrance. Share prices immediately began to fall. Board members demanded answers. Investors panicked. For the first time in decades, Richard Sinclair realized someone wasn't only targeting his granddaughter. They were trying to destroy the entire Sinclair empire. That evening, Marcus entered Richard's office carrying an old file. "I found something." Richard looked up. "What is it?" A retired detective called. "He says he has information about Victoria's accident." Richard stood instantly. "Why didn't he come forward before?" Marcus hesitated. "He says he was afraid." An hour later, inside a small lakeside cabin outside the city, Richard, Marcus, and Ethan met the retired detective. His name was Daniel Brooks. He looked exhausted, older than his years. He locked the front door before speaking. "They're watching everyone connected to this case." Richard's voice was calm. "Who?" Daniel looked toward the window. "I don't know, but I know someone inside the investigation accepted money." He placed a faded photograph on the table. It showed Victoria's wrecked car before it had been removed. Ethan leaned closer. His heartbeat quickened. "What am I looking at?" Daniel pointed toward the rear bumper. "There." A tiny silver emblem, almost invisible. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "I've seen that symbol before." Richard frowned. "Where?" Ethan closed his eyes, trying to remember. Then suddenly, he froze. "The repair shop." Everyone looked at him. "The day before I came to Sinclair Manor, a luxury SUV came into our garage. It had the exact same emblem." Marcus asked, "Who owned it?" "I don't know." The driver refused to give his name, but he insisted the security cameras be turned off. Daniel slowly leaned back. "If it's the same vehicle, then whoever owns it may be connected to both attacks." Meanwhile, inside Claire Holt's penthouse, her phone rang. She answered without speaking. A nervous voice whispered. Someone talked. Claire's expression hardened. "Who?" "The retired detective." Silence. Then Claire quietly walked toward the fireplace. She tossed another document into the flames. Years of carefully hidden evidence turned to ash. Finally, she spoke. "Then we no longer have a witness." She ended the call. Across town, Daniel Brooks locked his cabin for the night. He believed, for the first time, that justice might finally happen. He never noticed. The black SUV parked deep inside the trees. A masked figure quietly stepped out, watching, waiting. As Daniel switched off the lights, the stranger raised a suppressed pistol. A single shot echoed through the forest. Bang! The cabin lights went dark, miles away. Ethan's phone suddenly rang. Marcus answered first. His face turned white. He looked at Richard, then at Ethan. His voice barely came out. We're too late. Daniel Brooks has been shot. Barely came out. We're too late. Daniel Brooks has been shot. The drive to the lakeside cabin felt endless. No one spoke. The only sound inside the SUV was the rain striking the windshield. Richard stared out the window. Marcus kept one hand on his phone. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about one thing. If Daniel was murdered, someone wanted the truth buried forever. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees. Police had already sealed off the property. As Ethan stepped out, he immediately noticed something unusual. There was almost no blood outside the cabin for a point-blank gunshot. That didn't make sense. The lead detective stopped them. I'm sorry. The crime scene is closed. Richard showed his identification. The detective sighed. You have 5 minutes. Inside, the cabin looked untouched. A chair had fallen over. A coffee mug lay shattered on the floor, but something felt wrong. Ethan slowly walked through the room. His mechanic's instincts had taught him. Small details mattered. He stopped beside the fireplace. The ashes were still warm. Someone had burned documents, only minutes before the shooting. He carefully moved the ashes with a metal poker. A small corner of paper had survived. Only 3 words remained visible. Project Orion. Ethan frowned. What is Project Orion? Richard slowly shook his head. I've never heard that name. Marcus quietly photographed the fragment. We'll have it analyzed. Just then, a forensic technician approached. Detective, you need to see this. Everyone walked toward the back bedroom. The technician pointed toward the window. The bullet entered here. But there isn't enough blood. The detective frowned. What are you saying? I'm saying the victim was probably alive when he left. Silence. Richard looked stunned. So Daniel wasn't killed. The technician shook his head. He was kidnapped. Across the city, inside an abandoned warehouse. Daniel Brooks slowly opened his eyes. His hands were tied. His vision was blurry. A single lamp hung from the ceiling. Footsteps echoed across the concrete floor. A woman stepped into the light. Claire Holt. She calmly pulled up a chair. I warned you to stay retired. Daniel glared at her. You'll never get away with this. Claire smiled. I already have. For 18 months. She placed a photograph on the table. It showed Victoria's crashed car. You should have destroyed every copy. Daniel whispered. I kept one. Claire's smile disappeared. Where? Daniel remained silent. Claire leaned closer. If you don't tell me. If someone else dies. Meanwhile, back at Sinclair Manor. Victoria sensed something was wrong the moment Ethan returned. She couldn't see his face, but she knew his silence. You found something. Ethan hesitated. We found another victim. Victoria slowly lowered her head. The same people. We think so. She stood quietly, then reached into a drawer beside the piano. She removed a small velvet box. Ethan. I've never shown this to anyone. He opened it. Inside was a damaged silver locket. The glass was cracked. A tiny family photograph remained inside. On the back, someone had engraved a date, October 14. Victoria gently touched the locket. I found this in my coat pocket. After the accident, I don't remember putting it there. Ethan turned it over again, then suddenly, his expression changed. Tiny letters, almost invisible, were scratched beneath the date. 017. His heartbeat quickened. Victoria, I don't think this is just a locket. She looked toward his voice. What do you mean? I think it's a clue. That same night, Marcus received an unexpected phone call. The number was blocked. He answered cautiously. Hello. A weak voice whispered, listen carefully. Marcus froze. It was Daniel Brooks, barely alive. They took me. The Old Harbor District. A warehouse 17. The line crackled. They're looking. For Orion. A loud crash echoed in the background. Then, the call ended. Marcus immediately called Richard. I know where he is. Richard stood. We leave now. Ethan grabbed his jacket. I'm coming. Richard looked at him. It could be a trap. Ethan nodded. I know. But if Daniel risked his life to call, we can't leave him there. Far across the city, inside Warehouse 17, Claire Holt looked down at Daniel's broken phone. She smiled coldly. He made the call. Exactly as planned. She turned toward the warehouse entrance. Now, they'll come to us. And hidden high above the steel rafters, a masked sniper slowly loaded a rifle, waiting for Ethan Carter to walk through the door. The city clock struck midnight. Cold rain swept across the deserted harbor district. Warehouse 17 stood alone, its rusted steel walls glowing beneath broken floodlights. Richard's convoy stopped 2 blocks away. Marcus looked through a pair of binoculars. No movement. Ethan wasn't convinced. That's exactly what worries me. Richard turned toward the security team. No one enters until I give the order. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling. Daniel Brooks hadn't risked his life just to lure them into another dead end. He looked at Marcus. If Daniel is alive, every second matters. Marcus nodded. I'll go with you. Inside the warehouse, everything was silent. Rows of abandoned shipping containers stretched into darkness. Water dripped from the ceiling. The smell of rust and oil filled the air. Ethan. Marcus whispered, something feels wrong. Before Ethan could answer, a weak voice echoed from somewhere ahead. Help. Please. It was Daniel, still alive. Ethan immediately ran toward the sound. Then, click, he froze. A thin steel wire stretched across the floor. His mechanic's instincts kicked in. Don't move. Marcus stopped instantly. Attached to the wire, hidden beneath an old wooden pallet, was a military-grade explosive. If I'd taken one more step, Ethan whispered, this whole place would have exploded. Marcus slowly exhaled. You just saved all of us. High above them, a masked sniper watched through his scope. He smiled. So, you're smarter than they said. His finger tightened on the trigger, just as he prepared to fire. Marcus noticed a tiny reflection from the rafters. Sniper. Bang, the bullet shattered a metal beam inches from Ethan's head. Security guards rushed inside. Gunfire erupted. The sniper disappeared into the darkness. Find Daniel. Ethan shouted. The team spread out. Seconds later, one of the guards yelled. Over here. Daniel Brooks was chained inside a locked shipping container. His face was bruised. His breathing was weak. Ethan quickly broke the padlock with a heavy steel bar. Daniel collapsed into his arms. There. Too late. Ethan shook his head. No. You're getting out of here. Daniel grabbed Ethan's sleeve. With trembling hands, he slipped a small USB drive into Ethan's palm. Protect. This. What is it? Daniel coughed violently. Everything. The accident. The bomb. The money. The names. Ethan's heart pounded. You have proof. Daniel nodded weakly. I copied every file. Before they found me. Outside, ambulances arrived. Richard rushed toward Daniel. Can you identify who did this? Daniel struggled to speak. He looked directly at Richard. I never saw the mastermind. But I heard everyone call her. He stopped, blood filled his mouth. Richard leaned closer. Who? Daniel whispered one final word. Claire. Then he lost consciousness. Miles away, inside her penthouse, Claire Holt received a phone call. The hostage escaped. Her expression hardened. What about the drive? We couldn't find it. For the first time that night, Claire looked genuinely worried. She walked to her office safe. Inside was another folder. Its cover read, Project Orion. She slowly opened it. There, hidden beneath dozens of financial records, was a single photograph. A much younger Richard Sinclair, standing beside another man. The man's face had been burned away. Claire whispered, They can never know who he really was. She threw the photograph into the fireplace, but she didn't notice. A second copy, still hidden inside the folder, back at Sinclair Manor. Ethan locked himself inside the study. He inserted the USB drive into Richard's secure computer. A password request appeared. No one knew the code. Victoria quietly entered the room. I heard the keyboard. Did you find something? Ethan nodded. I think this drive contains the truth. But it's encrypted. Victoria stood silently for a moment, then she suddenly remembered something. The locket. Ethan looked up. The numbers on the back. 017. Victoria frowned. My grandmother used to call October Orion month. Ethan's eyes widened. He typed, Orion. The computer paused, then, access granted. A hidden folder slowly appeared on the screen. Its title made Ethan's blood run cold. SINCLAIR Succession Plan, Confidential. Beneath it, hundreds of files began loading. Bank transfers, secret contracts, photographs, audio recordings, and one video file, dated exactly 1 day before Victoria's accident. Ethan clicked it, the screen flickered to life, and the first face that appeared wasn't Claire Holt. It was someone they trusted, someone who had been inside Sinclair Manor from the very beginning. Someone who had been inside Sinclair Manor from the very beginning. The video began without sound. A security camera overlooked Richard Sinclair's private garage. The timestamp read, 1 day before Victoria's accident. Richard leaned closer to the monitor. Marcus stopped breathing. Victoria stood silently beside Ethan. Then, the image sharpened. A black SUV slowly entered the garage. The driver's door opened. Everyone expected to see Claire Holt. Instead, a familiar man stepped out. Marcus whispered, "Impossible." It was Harold Bennett, Richard's personal attorney, the man who had worked for the Sinclair family for 27 years, the same man who had prepared Victoria's wedding contract, the same man Richard trusted with every will. Every business acquisition, every confidential document. Richard's face turned pale. "No, it can't be." The video continued. Harold looked around carefully. Moments later, another luxury car arrived. Claire Holt stepped out. She smiled. The two shook hands, then disappeared inside the garage office. There was still no audio, only images, but those images were enough. Richard slowly sat down. "I trusted him. Like family." Ethan opened another file, this time. An audio recording. Harold's voice filled the room. "Once Victoria is gone, Richard won't survive the shock. The succession plan will activate." Claire answered calmly, "and Sinclair Global becomes vulnerable." Harold laughed. "Exactly. Your investors take control." Richard slammed his fist onto the desk. "They were never after the inheritance. They wanted the entire company." Marcus looked horrified. This wasn't a family betrayal. It was a corporate takeover. Victoria stood frozen. Her voice trembled. "Harold used to read books to me. After I lost my eyesight, I trusted him." Ethan gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You couldn't have known." She shook her head. "How many lies was I living beside?" Richard immediately picked up his phone. "Call the police." Marcus stopped him. "Wait." Richard frowned. "Why?" "If Harold realizes we know the truth, he'll disappear." Ethan nodded. "Marcus is right. We need proof that's impossible to deny." Richard slowly lowered the phone, for the first time in his career. He wasn't thinking like a billionaire, he was thinking like a grandfather, that afternoon. Harold Bennett walked confidently into Sinclair Manor, just as he had done. Thousands of times before, a maid greeted him. "Good afternoon, Mr. Bennett." He smiled politely. "Is Mr. Sinclair available?" She nodded. "In the study." Harold adjusted his tie, completely unaware that everyone inside already knew. When Harold entered, Richard was sitting behind his desk, calm, silent, almost emotionless. Harold smiled. "You wanted to see me." Richard nodded. "Close the door." Harold did. Richard looked directly into his eyes. "We've been together almost 3 decades." Harold smiled warmly. 27 years. "I've always considered it an honor." Richard quietly pushed a photograph across the desk, the one from the security footage. Harold looked down. His smile disappeared, only for a second, then it returned. "I'm not sure what this is." Richard asked softly, "Do you know Claire Holt?" Harold didn't hesitate. "No." Richard pressed another button. The audio recording filled the room. Harold's own voice echoed through the speakers. His face instantly lost all color, for the first time. Richard saw fear, real fear, without warning. Harold bolted toward the door. Marcus was already waiting. 2 security officers tackled him to the floor. "Get off me." "You don't understand." Richard slowly stood. "I understand perfectly." Harold looked desperately around the room. Then he started laughing, not nervously, confidently. "You think this ends with me?" Richard narrowed his eyes. "What does that mean?" Harold smiled through bloodied lips. "You still don't know who Project Orion really belongs to." The room fell silent. Ethan stepped closer. "Who?" Harold looked directly at him. "It was never Claire. It was never me." He leaned forward, almost whispering. "The person you're looking for is already inside your family." Victoria's heart nearly stopped. A family. Before anyone could ask another question, a sharp crack echoed through the room. Bang! The study window exploded. A sniper's bullet struck Harold squarely in the chest. He collapsed instantly. Marcus shouted, "Down!" Security rushed toward the windows. Outside, a black motorcycle sped away through the estate gates. Harold gasped for air. Blood covered his shirt. Ethan knelt beside him. "Stay with me." Harold weakly grabbed Ethan's sleeve. With his final breath, he whispered just 2 words. "Trust, Eleanor." Then his hand fell. He was dead. The room became completely silent. Victoria frowned. "Eleanor." She looked toward Richard. "Grandpa." "There has never been an Eleanor in our family." Richard's face slowly turned white. There had been only one, someone whose name hadn't been spoken for over 25 years, someone everyone believed had died. The room fell into complete silence. Harold Bennett's body lay motionless on the study floor. Outside, security teams searched every inch of the estate. The sniper had vanished. Marcus lowered Harold's eyelids before standing. "We lost him." Richard wasn't listening. His mind was trapped by one name, Eleanor. Victoria broke the silence. "Grandpa." "Who was Eleanor?" Richard slowly walked toward the fireplace. His hands trembled. For nearly 30 years. He had buried that chapter of his life. "I told everyone she died." Victoria frowned, but she didn't. Richard closed his eyes. "No. She disappeared 31 years earlier, before Sinclair Global became one of America's largest corporations. Richard had a younger sister, Eleanor Sinclair, brilliant, fearless, and every bit as ambitious as he was, unlike Richard. She believed the company should never belong to one person. She wanted to divide ownership among employees. Richard wanted complete control. The argument tore the family apart. One night, Eleanor left. She never came back. A month later, a boat exploded off the Maine coast. Authorities declared her dead. No body was ever recovered. Richard whispered, "I spent decades believing she was gone." Marcus looked stunned. "And if she survived?" Richard nodded slowly. "She would still legally own part of Sinclair Global." Ethan's mind immediately connected the pieces. Project Orion. Richard looked at him. "It isn't about taking over Sinclair Global. It's about returning it to someone." Marcus added, "Eleanor's." The realization chilled the room. If Eleanor was alive, everything changed. Just then, Victoria remembered something. "When I was little, my grandmother used to read me bedtime stories." Richard smiled sadly. "So did she." Victoria shook her head. "No, not Grandma. A woman's." Richard frowned. "What woman?" "I never saw her face. I was only 6. But every Christmas, someone left me a silver music box." Richard's expression changed instantly. "A music box." Victoria nodded. "It played the same melody every year." Richard whispered, "Eleanor used to collect music boxes." Marcus immediately ordered the mansion archives to be searched. 3 hours later, an elderly housekeeper knocked on Richard's study door. "I think I found it." She carefully placed a dusty wooden box on the table. Inside lay a beautiful silver music box. Its surface was engraved with tiny lilies. Victoria gently touched it. "This is the one." Richard slowly wound the key. A delicate melody filled the room. Then something unexpected happened. A tiny compartment beneath the mechanism clicked open. Everyone stared. Inside was a folded letter. The paper had yellowed with age. The handwriting was unmistakable. Eleanor Sinclair. Richard carefully unfolded it. His voice shook as he read aloud. "If you are reading this, then someone has finally tried to destroy our family." The room froze. She had predicted it. Richard continued, "I did not die." Victoria gasped. "I disappeared because someone inside our own company wanted both of us dead." Marcus looked at Ethan. "This conspiracy started decades ago." Richard kept reading. "If they ever come for Victoria, find me." The final sentence stopped everyone cold. "Only I know who truly created Project Orion." The letter ended with an address. Not in New York, not in Washington, a small coastal town in Oregon. Ethan looked up. "We have to find her." Marcus nodded. "I'll have the jet ready within the hour." Richard folded the letter carefully. "No." Everyone looked at him. "If whoever killed Harold discovers we're searching for Eleanor, they'll reach her first." Ethan understood immediately. "So we travel quietly." Richard nodded. No security convoy. No company aircraft. No public records. Victoria smiled faintly. It'll be the first normal trip I've taken in years. But miles away, inside a private office overlooking Manhattan, Claire Holt watched live security footage from Sinclair Manor. One of her spies lowered a hidden camera. They found the letter. Claire didn't look surprised. I expected they would. The spy hesitated. They're searching for a leaner. Claire slowly stood. For the first time all night, she looked genuinely uneasy. So, she kept the music box. Claire walked to the window. Prepare the plane. The spy asked quietly. To Oregon? Claire answered without turning around. Yes. This time, we finish what should have been finished 30 years ago. The next morning, before sunrise, Ethan, Victoria, Richard, and Marcus quietly boarded an unmarked private aircraft. None of them noticed that another jet lifted off exactly 7 minutes later, following the exact same flight path. Hidden behind tinted windows, Claire Holt smiled. They're leading me. Straight to a leaner. Far below, the Atlantic disappeared beneath the clouds. Ahead of them waited a woman everyone believed had died. A woman carrying a secret powerful enough to destroy empires and expose the true mastermind behind Project Orion. The private jet landed just after sunrise. A thick blanket of fog covered the Oregon coastline. The ocean crashed violently against the cliffs. It was beautiful and strangely lonely. Marcus looked at the address written on a leaner's letter. It should be another mile. Richard stared silently out the window. For 31 years, he had believed his sister was dead. Now, he wasn't sure whether she would welcome him or slam the door in his face. A narrow dirt road led them to an old white lighthouse. It overlooked the Pacific Ocean. Beside it stood a modest wooden cottage. There were no luxury cars, no security guards, no cameras, just flowers lining the front porch. Victoria smiled softly. It smells like lavender. Richard froze. Eleanor loved lavender. For the first time, he believed she might really be there. Ethan knocked on the front door, no answer. He knocked again, still nothing. Just as Marcus reached for the handle, an elderly woman's voice came from behind them. I've been expecting you. Everyone turned. An elegant woman in her late 70s stood near the garden. Her silver hair moved gently in the ocean breeze. She carried a small basket filled with fresh flowers. Richard couldn't breathe. Eleanor. The woman smiled sadly. You've gotten old, Richard. Richard's knees nearly gave out. For over 3 decades, he had imagined this moment. Nothing prepared him for it. He slowly walked toward her. I buried you. Eleanor looked into her brother's eyes. I know. Then, without another word, they embraced. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. 31 years of grief ended in silence. Victoria listened carefully. She smiled through tears. So, I finally get to meet my great-aunt. Eleanor turned toward her. You sound exactly like your grandmother. Victoria laughed. I've been told that. Eleanor gently held Victoria's face. Then her smile disappeared. They came after you. Didn't they? Richard nodded. They've already tried twice. Eleanor closed her eyes. I was afraid this day would come. Inside the cottage, the walls were covered with old photographs. Some showed Richard and Eleanor as children. Others showed Sinclair Global during its earliest years. One photograph caught Ethan's attention. It showed Richard, Eleanor, and another man standing beside the company's first office. The man's face looked familiar, very familiar. Ethan frowned. I've seen him before. Marcus stepped closer. Where? Ethan couldn't remember, but something about that face felt strangely important. Eleanor poured tea for everyone. Then she opened an old wooden chest. Inside were dozens of journals, financial ledgers, photographs, cassette tapes, and one thick leather folder. She placed it on the table. This is Project Orion. Richard looked confused. I thought Orion was a takeover plan. Eleanor slowly shook her head. No. It started as a protection plan. Everyone stared at her. She continued. When Richard and I founded Sinclair Global, we received threats almost immediately. Competitors wanted our technology. Criminal investors wanted control. So we secretly created Project Orion. Marcus asked, what was its purpose? Eleanor answered quietly. If anything happened to our family, every illegal payment, every corrupt executive, Every hidden shareholder would automatically be exposed. Richard's eyes widened. It was an insurance policy. Alina nodded. Exactly. Victoria frowned. Then why did people start killing for it? Alina sighed. Because someone changed it. She opened the folder. Half the documents were missing. The original Project Orion disappeared 25 years ago. Someone stole it. They replaced it with a new version. One designed to steal Sinclair Global. Ethan slowly leaned forward. So Claire Holt never created Orion. No, she only inherited it. The room became completely silent. Alina reached into another envelope. She removed a faded photograph. It showed a board meeting from decades earlier. Richard immediately recognized everyone, except one person. A young man standing in the back. Alina pointed at him. Do you remember him? Richard stared, then slowly shook his head. No. You hired him yourself. He worked in accounting. Richard still couldn't remember. Alina whispered. His name was Michael Graves. The name meant nothing to anyone until Marcus suddenly stood. His face turned white. I know that name. Everyone looked at him. Marcus grabbed his tablet. He searched through Sinclair Global's current employee database. After a few seconds, he stopped. No, it can't be. Ethan looked over his shoulder. What is it? Marcus slowly turned the screen toward everyone. A current executive profile appeared. Chief Financial Officer, Daniel Graves. Marcus swallowed hard. Michael Graves. Was Daniel Graves' father. The room fell silent. Daniel Graves wasn't just another executive. He was Richard Sinclair's most trusted financial advisor. The man who had controlled every major transaction for the last 15 years. The man who had personally approved the payments after Victoria's accident. Alina slowly closed the folder. I don't believe Claire Holt is the mastermind. I believe she's working for the Graves family. Before anyone could respond, a loud explosion shook the entire cottage. Boom, windows shattered. The lights went out. Marcus immediately drew his weapon. Everyone down. Outside, black SUVs surrounded the lighthouse. Masked men poured out carrying rifles. Claire Holt hadn't come alone. She had brought an army. The explosion shattered every window in the cottage. Glass rained across the wooden floor. Victoria instinctively covered her ears. Richard pulled her behind a stone fireplace. Marcus drew his pistol. Everyone stay down. Outside. At least a dozen armed men surrounded the lighthouse. Black SUVs blocked every road leading out. Ethan peeked through a broken window. They're cutting off every exit. Marcus nodded grimly. This wasn't an attack. It was an execution. A loudspeaker crackled outside, then Claire Holt's calm voice echoed across the cliffs. Richard, this doesn't have to end badly. Richard slowly stood behind the fireplace. You murdered innocent people. Claire laughed. I removed obstacles. You tried to kill my granddaughter. I tried to protect my future. Richard's eyes filled with anger. You'll never own Sinclair Global. Claire smiled. Oh, I don't need to. The person who will is already inside your company. Inside the cottage, Alina quietly walked toward an old bookshelf. She pulled out a dusty Bible, then another book. A hidden steel safe appeared inside the wall. Ethan looked surprised. You've had this all these years? Alina nodded. I always knew they'd come. She entered a 6-digit code. The safe clicked open. Inside was another USB drive, a leather journal, and one sealed envelope. Alina handed the USB drive to Ethan. This is the real Project Orion. Richard frowned. Then what was on Daniel's drive? A copy. This is the original. Marcus immediately connected the USB to his secure laptop. A folder appeared, thousands of documents. Financial records, private contracts, secret bank accounts. Then, one folder caught Ethan's attention. Beneficiary, he opened it. Inside was a signed agreement dated 26 years earlier. Everyone stared at the signature, Daniel Graves. Richard couldn't believe it. He was involved. Before Victoria was even born, Alina nodded slowly. His father recruited him. They planned this takeover. For decades, suddenly, Marcus' radio came alive. Sir. This is Team Alpha. We've intercepted company communications. Marcus grabbed the radio. Report. A voice answered urgently. Daniel Graves has called an emergency board meeting. Richard looked stunned. What? Marcus continued listening. They're voting to remove you as chairman. Today. Claire smiled outside the cottage. The attack had only been a distraction while Richard was trapped in Oregon. Daniel Graves was stealing Sinclair Global. Richard clenched his fists. They planned both attacks at once. Ethan looked at Marcus. How long until the vote? 45 minutes. We'll never make it. Silence filled the room, then Victoria quietly spoke. Maybe. We don't have to. Everyone looked toward her. She smiled. The board meeting is virtual. Marcus blinked. You're right. Richard slowly smiled. They can hold the meeting anywhere. So can we, within minutes. Marcus connected Alina's secure satellite internet. The laptop came online. The Sinclair Global boardroom appeared on screen. Dozens of directors were already seated. Daniel Graves stood confidently at the head of the table. Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you, Richard Sinclair has disappeared. I therefore move that I become interim chairman. Several directors nodded. Daniel smiled. Victory was only seconds away. Then, the boardroom doors suddenly opened. An assistant rushed inside. Sir, the chairman is requesting access. Daniel frowned. Impossible. The large screen activated. Richard Sinclair appeared live from the lighthouse. Every director gasped. Good morning, Richard said calmly. I hear you've started the meeting without me. Daniel forced a smile. Richard, we were concerned. Richard interrupted him. No, you were impatient. Daniel's smile faded. Richard continued. I also have something I'd like everyone to see. Marcus connected the original Project Orion files, one by one. The documents filled every screen. Illegal transfers, bribery payments, fraud, corporate espionage. Murder cover-ups. Every file carried the same approval signature, Daniel Graves. The board members stared in disbelief. One director whispered, My God. Another stood. Security. Daniel slowly backed away. These files are fake. Alina stepped into view beside Richard. The room froze. Several elderly directors recognized her instantly. Alina Sinclair. Daniel's confidence disappeared. It isn't possible. Richard smiled. It is now. Just then. Sirens echoed outside the lighthouse. Not one, not two, but dozens. FBI vehicles, state police, federal marshals. Marcus looked outside and smiled. They made it. Claire Holt turned around. Her face lost all color. Federal agents surrounded every SUV. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Drop your weapons. Her men began surrendering one after another. Claire looked toward the lighthouse. For the first time in decades, she realized she had lost. Inside the board meeting, Daniel suddenly ran. He sprinted toward the emergency exit, but waiting outside stood Ethan. Daniel swung a punch. Ethan ducked. Years of lifting engines had made Ethan stronger than he looked. One clean punch. Daniel crashed into the hallway wall. Federal agents immediately handcuffed him as they led him away. Daniel looked back at Ethan. You were supposed to be nobody. Ethan calmly replied, I still am. I just chose the right side. Hours later, the news spread across America. SINCLAIR conspiracy exposed billion-dollar fraud ring collapses, chairman cleared after DECADS long plot. Claire Holt. Daniel Graves. Corrupt executives. Paid investigators. Every member of Project Orion's criminal network was arrested. The empire had survived, not because of its money, but because one honest mechanic refused to look away. 3 months later, the Sinclair estate looked different. There were no security barricades, no reporters, just family. Victoria stood beside the garden fountain. She turned as she heard Ethan's footsteps. I have a surprise for you. Ethan smiled. What is it? She slowly removed her sunglasses. Her eyes met his for the first time. She wasn't looking into darkness. She was looking at him. The experimental surgery funded after the conspiracy ended had restored part of her vision. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. You can see me? Victoria smiled through her own tears. Not perfectly, but clearly enough to know I married the right man. Ethan gently took her hands. I never married you because you were a billionaire. I married you because you deserved to be loved. Richard watched from the terrace. Alina stood beside him. She smiled softly. Grandma's letter was right. Richard nodded. It wasn't wealth that saved our family. It was kindness. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan wrapped his arm around Victoria. This time, she didn't need anyone to guide her forward. Together, they walked toward a future built not on billions, but on trust, courage, and a love that had begun with an impossible promise.